Friends, welcome again for this concluding part of today. And as you can read from the program, the idea is that we focus on the myth of Prometheus and his crucifixion, so to speak, in the light of the lecture we had before dinner, where we focused on that unique original teaching which you can find in Theosophy, that the progenitors of man's mind and self-consciousness is not a personal God, neither matter or coincidence, but consists of a hierarchy of spiritual beings who have different names, like Manasaputras, sons of the universal mind, solar pitris, etc., etc. And we also mentioned, and we gave an example, for example, by referring to the myth of the fallen angels and Lucifer in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we also mentioned that, according to Theosophy, mythology and the language of myths echoes that wisdom in different forms. Now, within the Western tradition, we can find different examples, and one of the most famous examples is the myth of Prometheus, who stole the fire from the gods and gave it to mankind. That myth of Prometheus is a very powerful myth. There are different versions of that myth, popular, less popular. It has been used for centuries in all kinds of art form, drama, even commercials, even jokes. I will show you one later on. And we thought, well, we can explain the myth, and to be honest, doing the lecture again in a different way. And by doing that, also showing some powerful imagery built up throughout the ages, where that myth of Prometheus plays a central role. And that's a nice combination, you know. It doesn't only have to be words. Sometimes images can touch us too. And if such a myth was so inspirational for so many artists throughout history, that already is an important fact. So what we're going to do is focus on the deeper meaning of the myth, touch some deeper meanings, as explained in The Secret Doctrine, and you can find that in volume 2, page 409, and subsequent pages. And to be honest, it's one of the few chapters that is really consistent, focused on one subject. It's a beautiful chapter because it really manages to focus for 13 pages on an analysis of that myth. Here already you see two classical, very dramatic paintings, one by Van Buren, and here, for example, where Prometheus is being chained. This is not coincidentally, and that's why it shows as a title, Crucifixion of Prometheus, which is of course a wrong way of stating it. But you see that a lot of Christian painters put the archetypal imagery of a crucifixion into the Prometheus myth. If you would not know better, you would almost say that it's Christ getting crucified, isn't it? Interesting is here that we see which god? We all know him, Hermes. Yes, he plays. Normally, in the popular versions of the myth, he's not mentioned that often, but nevertheless, he plays a role in the myth as is being told by Hesiod and Aeschylus, the two main sources of the myth as it has come through us. This one I've used in the lecture. I like this one particularly. Not only because it's an impressive painting, but when I saw that painting, I thought that this is as if Prometheus thinking, am I going to give it them or am I not going to give it? It's a funny, maybe I don't think he's thinking that, but here you see indeed a beautiful visual presentation of what we would call in theosophical parlance, and of course the painter maybe didn't have that in mind, sleeping mankind from a certain perspective. An empty, senseless Buddha, we would say, in The Secret Doctrine. It's interesting here, man that has to receive the fire. So let's see what we can say about the myth of Prometheus. Now, the main source is, of course, a secret doctrine, but it's important to understand that H.P. Blavatsky herself makes clear that myths, fables, symbols may have different meanings. And of course, what we are now going to hear, not only about Prometheus, is from that particular perspective that HPB found important to focus upon. Nevertheless, we should not forget that she herself made clear that, for example, all the gods in mythology, specifically the gods of the Olympus, and of course other figures in mythology too, may have different meanings and not only one. She says, for example, in volume 2, page 765, now all the gods of the Olympus, as well as those of the Hindu pantheon and the rishis, were the septiform personifications of 1, the noumena of the intelligent powers of nature, 2, of cosmic forces, 3, of celestial bodies, 4, of gods or the Anshohans, 5, of psychic and spiritual powers, 6, of divine kings on earth or the incarnations of the gods, and 7, of terrestrial heroes or men. The knowledge how to discern among these 7 forms the one that is meant in a myth belonged at all times to the initiates, whose earliest predecessors had created this symbolical and allegorical system. So that opens up a lot of possible interpretations to a myth. So next to HPB, we were also happy to find a commentary made by Damascius, one of the most older Neoplatonists. And he gave some interesting commentaries which are slightly different, and sometimes largely different even than HPB's. Just to mention that it's a subject worthwhile to study from different perspectives. If you want to know more about how the Neoplatonists, in a more or less accessible manner, look at these myths, quite recently, I mean last years, it has been published by the Prometheus Trust, accidentally, the Prometheus Trust. Prometheus Trust is a very important, small, but very important organization because their primary focus has been and still is the republication of the collected works of Thomas Taylor. Thomas Taylor, HPB herself would consider him as one of her predecessors, so to speak, in the sense that if HPB uses classical authors, she has clearly a great preference in using Thomas Taylor. Thomas Taylor was a very unique man who translated and made known in this day and age, century more or less before HPB, he died around 1835, I think, made known the Neoplatonic writings, but also his translations of the works of Plato. And, you know, there are, of course, always critics, especially academics, who say, well, his Greek was not always what it should be, but people who know not only Greek, but especially philosophy, one professor I consulted said, well, his Greek may not be ideal, but his knowledge of Platonism and Neoplatonism is the best you will ever have. It's funny to say, or to see a resemblance with George Mead. Some authorities in Gnosis and Gnosticism, like Professor Quispel in the Netherlands, who died a few years ago, he himself was inclined to say, well, George Mead's English, let alone his Coptic, was not perfect, but he had a feel for Gnosis. Professor Quispel, I still remember it when he was in his 90s. He came to the stage or the platform, and he had a very fiery nature. And I remember him saying that, although he was not a Theosophist or big fan of Theosophy itself, but he respected the legacy of what George Mead, the Theosophist George Mead, had done for the Renaissance of Gnosticism way before the Nag Hammadi writings were discovered. Well, Thomas Taylor is more or less comparable for Neoplatonism. And the Prometheus Trust not only publishes the works of Thomas Taylor, in the beautiful English that Thomas Taylor used, but also publishes their own works. And one of the leading persons in that organization, Tim Addy, has written a very accessible, beautiful book, The 7 Myths of the Soul, which I can recommend, largely based on Damascus and some other Neoplatonists, and different myths of Persephone, Dionysus, Heracles, but also Prometheus, are being analyzed from that perspective. And if you're interested in that kind of stuff, it's certainly worthwhile. The 7 Myths of the Soul. Okay. Just to say, that there is more than meet the eye. I'm sorry. So, let's first give a summary, more or less, of the myth itself and the main characters. Because we all know that he stole fire, but what is the context in which that happened? I'm going to read a short summary where parts of the myth, like told by Hesiod and Aeschylus, are more or less put together. So bear with me a little while. Now, Prometheus is the son of the Titan Iapetus and the ocean nymph Clymene, brother of Atlas, and also brother of another crucial figure, Epimetheus. Now, when the gods, imagine the gods, after the conquest of the Titans, were negotiating with mankind about the honor to be paid to them, Prometheus, one of those Titans, was charged with the duty of dividing a victim offered in sacrifice to the gods. He endeavored, clever man, to impose upon Zeus by dividing it in such a way as cleverly to conceal the half which consisted of flesh and the edible vitals under the skin of the animal, and to lay thereon the worst part, the stomach, while he heaped the bones together and covered them with fat. So he was doing mischief and playing a trick with Zeus. Zeus divined the stratagem, but out of enmity towards man, purposely chose the worst portion and avenged himself by refusing mortals the use of fire. And thereupon Prometheus stole it from Olympus and brought it to men in a hollow reed. As a set-off to this great blessing, Zeus resolved to send them an equally great evil. He caused Hephaestus to make of clay a beautiful woman, chercher la femme, the French would say, chercher la femme. He caused Hephaestus to make of clay a beautiful woman named Pandora, that is, the all-gifted. For the gods presented her with all manners of charms and adornments, coupled, however, with lies, flattering words, and a crafty mind. Not a very positive image of women here. Maybe you already see a little bit kind of the women did it, like Eve did it. Well, something to say of it, not in a literal sense, but you see already a kind of analogy creeping up. Okay. Now, Hermes brought her with a jar or a box as her dowry, in which every evil was shut up, hence Pandora's box, to the brother of Prometheus, named Epimetheus. Now, Prometheus means he who sees before him, who can think before, he who has foreknowledge. HPB, and no academic would agree with that, I think. HPB goes in the secret doctrine even that far that she tries to find even Sanskrit correspondences in that name. That would be too detailed to go into detail now, but Prometheus is the one who sees before, but his brother Epimetheus, to which Pandora is given as a form of seducing him, is the one who has only hindsight, the afterthinker. Well, let's be honest. If you have to give a beautiful woman with a devious plan behind it, you have to give it to a man who only can think afterwards, not? So that makes sense. Okay? So the name itself has already some meaning, as we will see later on. So Epimetheus, the man of afterthought, for he never thought of what he did until it had brought him into trouble. In some versions of the myth, by the way, it is primarily Epimetheus who, to cut a long story short, is responsible for the creation or the making in order of all the lower parts of nature. That's interesting, huh? The lower kingdoms, especially the animal kingdoms, while Prometheus gives fire to mankind. But that's a detail now. So Pandora is offered to Epimetheus, and in spite of his brother's warning, who of course already knows what will happen, not to receive any present from Zeus, he was ensnared by her anyway, by her charms, and took her to wife. Should have known better. Pandora opened the jar, and out flew all manner of evils, troubles and diseases, before unknown to man, and spread over all the world. Only delusive hope remained in the box, in the jar, since before she could escape. The box was closed again. Pandora put the lid on the jar again. But Prometheus met with his own punishment. So the focus is a lot on the punishment of Prometheus, of what Prometheus had done. But as we now see, Epimetheus is punished his way by, or through, or via Pandora. Prometheus' punishment is well known. Zeus bound him in adamantine feathers to a pillar with an eagle to consume in the day his liver, which grew again in the night, until at last Heracles, with his strong muscles and power, desired to increase and to release Prometheus and kill the eagle and set Prometheus free. That's in a nutshell the storyline. And of course, throughout the ages, details have changed and extra things have been put in that myth. It's a beautiful story. You can make a soap out of it if you want, you know. And it has become a very important tragedy, a drama. Aeschylus is named, well-known play by him. And this is a quote from an English translation, well-known English translation, where you hear in that play by Aeschylus, the play called Prometheus Bound, the following words, that before Prometheus gave the celestial fire to men, men at first had eyes, but all their sight was vain. They had ears, but did not hear. Instead, they were like the shapes we see in dreams, and all through their long life they mingled all things aimlessly. Isn't that a good description of mankind before the celestial fire was given? So what does Prometheus symbolize? Quite clearly symbolize, according to HBB, Prometheus symbolizes the crucified Titan, is the personified symbol of the collective logos, the host and of the lords of wisdom, or the heavenly man who incarnated in humanity. So the host, the hierarchy of Manasaputras, collectively are symbolized by Prometheus. By Prometheus. And this is an old detail of an old, would you say vase or vase, or both is good, I think. Yeah. It remains impressive, don't you think? It's such art form. Now, sometimes the bird is a vulture or an eagle, and the eagle is, of course, also representative of Zeus. Yes? It's always Zeus. I find it very intriguing imagery. So, if we connect that with what we've seen in the lecture, the incarnation of Prometheus, which is not one being, but the whole collectivity of Manasaputras, or solar angels, is the awakening of the human soul. The fire of Prometheus, our spiritual ego, or Manasaputra, awakened the latent mind in us, and since then, Prometheus represents our spiritual ego. Now, the intriguing questions may arise now. You know, for example, an intriguing question remains in understanding the mythology. Well, Zeus, Z-E-U-S, isn't that a supreme god? Don't we know him as the big boss? Does it make sense that the supreme divine being punishes the successful attempt of Prometheus to enlighten mankind? Isn't that paradoxical? A lot of paradoxes are, of course, in myths. The gods behave towards each other in a way that they themselves don't recommend or even punish mankind for. They are adulterous, they sleep with each other, they fight with each other, they do things with each other that you say, hello, we should be ethical and you are doing all that mischief. Well, the Neoplatonists, including Damascus themselves, say, well, we shouldn't take that literally, and again, there are different meanings. And HPB finds it very important to, if we focus on Zeus, on Zeus, that here again, that key she gives in the beginning, that there may be 7 or even more interpretations if we are dealing with those gods, becomes practical and applicable. Because she says that the god, Zeus, may have different higher and lower meanings. Hence, the punishment can become more understandable. Let me give you a very interesting quote about that. I have to look it up. Yeah, she says, the translators of the drama put in writing by Aeschylus wonder about the discrepancy between the character of Zeus as portrayed in Prometheus Bound and that depicted in other remaining dramas. I wonder how could that supreme god do what he does? And HPB says, and if it's not true, it's cleverly found. Well, this is because between Zeus, the abstract deity of Grecian thought, as a symbol for the Logos, the divine, and the Olympic Zeus, there is an abyss. The latter, so the Zeus who punishes Prometheus, represented during the mysteries no higher a principle than the lower aspect of human physical intelligence, manas wedded to kama. Prometheus is divine aspect merging into and aspiring to buddhi, the divine soul, and Zeus is the lower human soul, even kama. And a few pages later on, she says, in the case of the myth of Prometheus, and now it becomes very interesting, Zeus represents the host of the primeval progenitors of the lunar Pitris, the fathers who created man senseless and without any mind, while the divine titan Prometheus himself stands for the spiritual creators who fell into generation. So you see a practical application that HPB gives here. Zeus is here represented as, in one word, the king of the lower, not the king of the higher. That would not make sense. That would not punish Prometheus. Isn't that intriguing how HPB gives an appropriate meaning to Zeus and even equates the punishing Zeus with the lunar Pitris, with the lower creators? Interesting, isn't it? So, Zeus represents the lower aspect of human physical intelligence, the human soul, whenever shown yielding to his lower passions, the jealous god, revengeful and cruel in his egotism. Now go to the Bible, dear friends, the Old Testament. Look at the terminology, the jealous god, revengeful and cruel in its egotism. Who is jealous in the Garden of Eden and says, thou shalt not worship any other god than me? Jehovah. Now for HPB, that's how our mind works, or how the Theosophical mind works. The God who forbids, and it's all symbolism, there is not a creature in the Garden of Eden doing something, is not the all-supreme divine God, and the Gnostics understood that. It's the lower demiurge, the lower creator, a representation of the lower creative powers. Zeus in the myth of Prometheus is Jehovah in the Old Testament myth. And she plays with that idea, even by her terminology, by stating here the jealous God, revengeful and cruel in his egotism. That's the classical picture of the Old Testament God. If he doesn't like it, he kills it. And to be honest, that's how our lower ego works. If we don't like it, we kill it. And who is king in us? Sometimes, most of the time, Prometheus or him? Zeus. That's Zeus. So I found that a very interesting analogy that HPB makes, and that the Gnostics seem to have understood. That's why the serpent, remember, the Luciferian serpent, frees biological mankind out of the Garden of Eden, eat of the tree of knowledge, and free yourself. Of course, the price of the freedom is that you will recognize your own mortality as a physical being. But it gives you also the chance to recognize your own potential immortality, which you would never recognize if you would not become self-conscious. It cuts both ways. And of course, the lower powers resist against that. We recognize it on the spiritual path itself. If we desire to choose a better side of us, immediately we feel that the other side resists against that. It doesn't want to lose territory. Well, if you want to express that symbolically, mythologically, you personify that struggle. It's also in the Gita, that struggle. Okay. Here again a beautiful statement by Aeschylus with a beautiful painting. Prometheus always useful, vigorous, manly, half naked, of course, because otherwise the eagle cannot pick the liver. And chained on the rock. And he, Prometheus himself, says, "From sinking blasted down to Hades' gloom, for this by the thy tortures I am bent, grievous to suffer, piteous to behold, I who did mortals pity." You know, how many times our spiritual ego says this? It's beautiful, isn't it? And Hades is this. Well, not this room, I mean, but I mean a separate sense of feeling of existence where we feel separated and disconnected and on this physical plane. It's a kind of a hellish existence in comparison with higher levels of existence. And still to this day, you can't believe it. If you only Google, it's unbelievable how many theater companies are still making productions and new adaptations, some well, some maybe not so well, that depends on your taste, of that theater play of Aeschylus. It remains a very popular thing to put on the playlist and for directors to do that. I don't know whether it's ever made a movie. Does anyone know that? I didn't find it. It would be interesting to make a movie out of it, especially now with all those special effects, with a deeper sense of meaning in it, maybe. Here you see a modern version, and you see it's modern in the way how it's being depicted. Prometheus, really in a crucified version again, and very modern with the chains. And again, a quote from Aeschylus, where Prometheus says, "It would be hard indeed for you to bear my pains," he says to mankind, "since for me death is not permitted by the fates. That would have been to find freedom from my trouble, but now there lies before me no end to my labors until the time Zeus falls from his dictatorship." Now, how would we translate that philosophically? What is he really saying, or which part in us is saying what? How would you translate this theosophically? If he says, for example, if the Prometheus in us says, "It would be hard indeed for you to bear my pain, since for me death is not permitted by the fates." What does that mean? death is not permitted. Death is for me not a solution to get out of my suffering. Why not? Yes, of course, it's an immortal being, which is also made clear that the liver is being picked, but it grows on again, you know. Any other ideas? Yes, the dictatorship of Zeus first has to end. So Zeus, meaning our lower personal self, which is the result of the dictatorship. And here you have, you know, you find it everywhere, Prometheus. In the Rockefeller Center, you find this statue. But I think it's beautiful in its own way. It's modern, but Prometheus fountain. And those who were in Budapest, that's a funny story. You remember that maybe, and some other people. We were giving a lecture on a similar subject as this one. And for the whole week, almost no one saw that one of the walls was Prometheus painted on it. So we were giving a lecture and we were showing some pictures of Prometheus, not in detail like now. And the person in Budapest who did the recording, he was suddenly getting nervous and pointing to the wall, and no one knew, what are you pointing to the wall to? And suddenly everyone looked at the wall, and we saw it was kind of like picture like that of Prometheus. He was flying. Yes, that was so funny. It was a very funny synchronicity. So you find him in the most unexpected places, even during Theosophical conferences. I like this one. And it's true. It's not only funny, it's true. So Prometheus saying, I'm miserable. And the vulture saying, if today has got you down, remember, tomorrow is just around the corner. And tomorrow the eagle does the same thing. You know, how much of our suffering, it's funny, but to be honest, how much of our suffering is indeed not the prolongation of living in the future or in the past and the same misery again and again and again without changing the situation? I think it was Jung who once told us that if you're trying, or Einstein, you know, I don't know who, a famous person who said, if you're constantly doing the same thing without the effect, you mustn't expect that something else will come out of it. You know, you have to change your mind then. And was it Churchill who said, who defined history as follows, history is one damn thing after the other. Well, that's clearly here. So you see, the myth of Prometheus, it says a lot. The myth of Prometheus is definitely that well known that a cartoonist can make use of it. Think of it. It's a very public known archetypal figure. Because if you don't know the relationship between those two figures, that cartoon hardly says anything. So it shows how it has become part of our popular culture even. On the other side, it's only a cartoon, of course. So the gift of Prometheus is the awakening of self-consciousness. But then we also see the role of Pandora and Hephaestus. What do they mean in this picture? Well, if you study the secret doctrine and couple that with some Neoplatonist commentators, one way of looking at it, and there may be 6 or maybe more different other ways, is that if you think of Epimetheus, Hephaestus, and Pandora as crucial figures in the storyline of that myth, then according to one interpretation, and I will quote the one I found, it is linked with the separation of the sexes, which is more or less at the same time that mankind became self-conscious according to Theosophy. The teaching that man was once androgynous and then became separated in 2 biological sexes is closely related, not necessarily causally related, but it goes pari passu with the teaching that man became self-conscious. And I will read to you the interpretation from that perspective. Hephaestus creating Pandora, the first woman, remember that Hephaestus creates her, typifies that great change in the evolution of mankind when from the state of hermaphroditism, the separation of sexes occurred as it did in the third root race. Man, from having been androgyne, became male and female. In the Bible, you see that Eve creating from the side of Adam. And now Pandora became the life companion of Epimetheus, the man of afterthought. Evidently, Epimetheus and Pandora stand for the ensuing physical humanity, because Prometheus stands for spiritual man. Epimetheus and Pandora stand for the ensuing physical humanity after the separation of the sexes, when the golden age of humanity had come to an end. As man's material progress advanced, his sensuous nature and physical intelligence gained the upper hand in his being, and he lost his spiritual power of intuition that was awakened by Prometheus. From Prometheus, the man of forethought, humankind became in the course of time only Epimetheus, the man of afterthought. And Pandora and her box of evils stand then symbolically for the evils that are generated thereby. Not only the pain of the vulture eating up our liver, a very karmic, animalistic organ, but also the evils of a psychic and other nature are being released. Fear, hate, jealousy, whatever evils that can be found. On that curse, HPB says, the fire received has turned into the greatest curse. The animal element and consciousness of its possession has changed periodical instinct, specifically the instinct for procreation, into chronic animalism and sensuality. HPB can create some drama in the way she depicts things. We know that. She can be very dramatic in her writing style, but there is a reason for it. There never was an original sin, she says. So she immediately says, well, don't think that I mean there is an original sin. No, there never was an original sin, but only an abuse of physical intelligence, the psychic being guided by the animal, and both putting out the light of the spiritual. Well, if that's not the opening up of a box, what is it? So, I like this one because we here see a sculpture. We haven't seen many sculptures yet, almost all paintings. But it's a very impressive sculpture by Sébastien Adam, typical of that 18th century, late 18th century style. You can see it in the Louvre. The drama of the divine mind changed, indeed. That's the human condition, isn't it? This drama of the struggle of Prometheus with the Olympic tyrant and despot, sensual Zeus, one sees enacted daily within our actual mankind. The lower passions chain the higher aspirations to the rock of matter to generate in many a case the vulture of sorrow, pain, and repentance. We can sympathize with that description of the human condition. What, Sergio? Yes. Yeah. But the agony, but at the same, what I find striking in a lot of these paintings, friends, I don't know whether that's the intuition of the artist or coincidence, but what I find striking in a lot of these ways of depicting it is, on one hand, you see sometimes quite agony, but don't you see also an incredible power remaining in Prometheus? He's not weak. He's very courageous, powerful, virile, as if he can bear it. Not a meek Jesus, a strong Christ figure. If you that figure, it is as if he doesn't care. Oh, there's a little bird. It's a damn vulture, not a little bird. So, some painters definitely felt the need to express a kind of sympathy for the destiny and the fate of Prometheus, and to express that in a very powerful way. Don't you like the colors also? That's typical Moreau, the colors of that sky behind it, that gives a very interesting perspective. As if there is still hope and a horizon, not only gloom. And then we slowly go to the solution of the human problem. There is, of course, as I told you in the beginning, the Deus ex machina, saving grace, a figure that is able to save Prometheus. Now, HPB says in that chapter on Prometheus that some Christian commentators have derived from that part of the myth the idea that the Greeks already had a kind of premonition that Christ would come. I mean, there is a time that a lot of Christian commentators reinterpreted ancient myths in order to give it a Christian turn. Of course, that was not the meaning that those Greeks had intended, Heracles, who rescues Prometheus and thereby saves mankind from his pitiful destiny, is not Christ coming to earth, predicted 500 years before Christ in the myths of Aeschylus. No, HPB says Heracles is who? Give a guess. Who is the only one, symbolically speaking, that can liberate, so to speak, the spiritual ego chained in the matter of our desires? Will that be something completely outside of us? If Prometheus is already inside of us, what would Heracles then be? What aspect in our human constitution has to do 12 labors in order to redeem? The will be definitely a part of it. If the active mind is Prometheus awakening the latent mind, have we not had a quote that the essence that is given by the Manasaputras has to become what by personal exertion? A human higher self. You remember? Heracles will be the human soul grown up as a warrior, will be our Arjuna. We will become ourselves Promethean. We have to become ourselves Buddhimanasic. We have to liberate the human soul from the domination of Zeus. And thereby, is there then still a need over the overshadowing Manasaputra? Or have we then more or less ourselves become higher Manasic? The latter, huh? You see? That's why the ancient idea was the mind is awakened from a sacrifice from above. You agree? You agree? Since then, that higher sacrifice is changed in us, crucified in us. Only a sacrifice from below can liberate the sacrificer from above. And that's beautifully rephrased by HPB in the following words. So, we have become Epimetheus solely by abuse of the gift of the mind. If we would become higher Manasic, we would liberate the Promethean enchainment, or what do you call it? We would liberate Prometheus. And Heracles, therefore, represents a completely different mankind, HPB says. It's something that will happen for mankind in general in the future. And the following passage, if I can find it, sums it up a little bit. Well, you can read at home the whole thing. Let's see. Here's a passage where she disagrees that Heracles is not the coming Christ. I will read this to you. Prometheus, having endowed man with wisdom which ministers to physical well-being and other well-being, but the lower aspect of manas, of the animal, having remained unchanged, instead of an untainted mind, heaven's first gift, there was created the eternal vulture of the ever unsatisfied desire of regret and despair, coupled with the dreamlike feebleness that fetters the blind race of mortals, until the day when Prometheus is released by his heaven-appointed deliverer, Heracles. Now, she says, this son that will deliver Prometheus is not a coming Christ. No, it refers to the state that will return to the world at large when the latter shall discover and really appreciate the truths which underlie the vast problem of sex. It will be like the light that never shone on sea or land and has to come to men through the Theosophical Society, or the whole Theosophical movement. That's quite a responsibility. This light will lead on and up to the true spiritual intuition, and the world will then finally have a race of Buddhas and Christ, for the world will have discovered that individuals have it in their own powers to procreate Buddha-like children or demons. And when that knowledge comes, all dogmatic religions, and with these the demons, will die out. Quite a statement, isn't it? This is page 415. 15. And a few pages later, this is beautiful. The modern Prometheus has now become Epimetheus, he who sees only after the event. That's a classical description of the personal ego. Because the universal philanthropy of the former has long ago degenerated into selfishness and self-adoration. But man will re-become a free titan of old, but not before cyclic evolution has re-established the broken harmony between the two natures, the terrestrial and the divine, after which he becomes impermeable to the lower forces, invulnerable in his personality, and immortal in his individuality, which cannot happen before every animal element is eliminated from his nature. Well, a long way to go. So Heracles liberating Prometheus is really the regenerated human soul liberating the Promethean spirit. You have to remember that all these characters are inside our constitution. Yeah? Not only outside, so to speak. And here we have Prometheus, Epimetheus, and Pandora. Now, who would ever resist such a woman? Or such a man, depending who is looking. So, you see Epimetheus, oh yes. No, don't go there. Pandora's box. This is very, how is this school of painting called? Pre-Raphaelites, yes. You see a lot of these pre-Raphaelites in the Old Tate Gallery, I think. Blake too, by the way, William Blake. Opening the box.
No. Yeah.
What?
Yes, not so many of William Blake.
No, but a few, huh? Yeah.
When we went, there weren't any really.
Oh, when I was there, but that's 10 years ago.
He said to go to the British Museum.
Is it going to the British Museum, William Blake? Oh, it's good to know. Pandora by Rossetti, very pretty Raphaelite, with still one thing remaining in the box, the hope. Well, friends, you see, these myths are really inviting us to have a deeper meaning to our own human history, don't they? And I would like to conclude as promised, because, yeah?
They have bow and arrow.
They have both what?
They had a bow and arrows, both the ones that liberated Prometheus.
Yes,
Yeah,
because the vulture is being killed.
Oh, just to shoot the vulture.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
It seems particularly symbolic.
oh, that must be. Damascus, for example, has written a commentary only on the fact that the fire, the fire that's being stolen, so to speak, by Prometheus, is in a hollow reed. You remember that? Persons like Olympiodorus and Damascus find it necessary to find a very deeper meaning in it. And they specifically invite the reader to say, don't think that's a coincidence, that there is a deeper meaning in these things. A lot of even academics would say, well, yeah, you can always find a deeper meaning. But as a theosophist, why would those ancients be more ignorant about their own myths than modern academics? That's quite a strange position. I think it's an interesting invitation that when those old writers themselves open up a deeper meaning, even in these details, that we should at least listen to them, and then we can make up our mind, You don't have to agree in the interpretation that HPB gives to this myth, but be honest, it at least gives a very powerful meaning to it, without excluding other meanings as HPB opens, and that myth is such powerful language, and yeah, maybe we should give that back to our children and our generation, the power of the myth. And the Belgian lady, for example, mentioned The Matrix as a movie, and look at the success of Tolkien, even Harry Potter. The Star Wars trilogy, or not trilogy because it's already 6 parts now, Star Wars, but there is the need, there is something in us that wants to depict some truths in mythological language. I'm not equating Star Wars with the powerful myths of the Scandinavians and the Greeks. I'm not saying that. I wouldn't like to equate that. But that you can't destroy in human nature the power of mythological language is, I think, from a theosophical perspective, very important. I would like to conclude with a prayer that is given by Prometheus, well, maybe it is, but a prayer that is written by Surawardi. And you could see that from our perspective as theosophists as really a prayer to our Prometheus. He would call it our angel or his inner master, or as he sometimes calls it, the philosopher's angel. And I've given it already, I think, in the previous school, but it's so beautiful, I'm going to give it again now. And it's very deep. It's a very deep prayer. It is the human soul who says it to the Manasaputra, to Prometheus. Thou, my Lord and Prince, my most holy angel, my precious spiritual being, thou art the Spirit who gave birth to me, and thou art the child to whom my spirit gives birth. You see the biunity? Thou who art clothed in the most brilliant of divine lights, may thou manifest thyself to me in the most beautiful of epiphanies. Show me the light of thy dazzling face. Be for me the mediator, and lift the veils of darkness from my heart. Thank you. It's beautiful, huh? And that biunity, which was mentioned in the lecture, is perfectly expressed by stating, "Thou art the Spirit who gave birth to me. Thou art that being who made active which was latent in me. But thereby you are also the child to whom my spirit gives birth. You are also that child which is being awakened." It's by unity. You know, it's... Yes?
Did you give this in the handout?
No. This not, no. Yes, but I think we can organize that the PowerPoint sheets will be made available for you of all the speakers and participants. I think that's manageable, huh? You know, these can be sent via mail or put on the website or whatever means. So, and that's good for all the PowerPoint presentations that still have to come.
Well, because I have to leave Friday afternoon.
Yeah, but you can leave your email, I think, and.
I'm not familiar with the history of the Prometheus thing. Were the Titans originally hermaphrodite, or?
Were the Titans hermaphrodite? Not in my view, but sorry.
Saying this Pandora and that's when they.
No. It refers to the possibly it refers to the going from the hermaphrodite stage of mankind to the splitting up of the sexes. But with regard to the Titans, of which much can be said, and of most of it I don't understand, one has to be honest there, but I found it quite helpful that Team Addy, and I just give it for what it's worth, you know. I always like people that know their stuff, so I trust that he knows his stuff. The Titans, and he quotes then Neoplatonic sources, are the offspring of a pre-Olympian generation of gods and goddesses, and they tell us something about the relationship of the intelligible gods, which are quite high rank of gods, to the gods of matter. In the scheme of the 6 choirs of gods that were recognized in the Neoplatonic tradition and the worlds which spring for them, the intellect, or the nous, is reflected in soul, life is reflected in nature, and being is reflected in matter. Now there are figures to illustrate that, but forget that. Thus the primordial gods, who may be considered as more powerful than the Olympian gods, give rise to the Titans, who are defeated by Zeus and his brethren way before him. That Prometheus myth happens. The word Titan, and I found that interesting, is derived from the Greek root tai, T-I, iota, which means particular. They are the divinities who rule the furthest reaches of the universe, the order of ultimate separation and particularization. This order is the most distant from the order of being, in which all things are gathered into one. For the whole universe is, as Thomas Taylor puts it, connectedly contained in being's occult causality. However, it is the closest order to being from the point of view of its essential component, pure matter, which has the effects of all the other orders occultly impressed upon it, etc., etc. So in other words, according to this particular perspective, these Titans are in between purely material and more intelligible. And yeah, you know, be honest, that's more or less what Prometheus seems to represent. Also in Theosophical psychology, it's in between. It connects heaven and earth. So, okay. Then I think it's time. Have a good night's sleep.